How does a veteran know whether or not to go back to school? How do you make that delineation?
Well, look, there's a couple things. I mean, higher ed obviously is one prominent path that helps propel people into better jobs, but there's also quite a few jobs out there right now, many of which are very high-paying jobs and in fruitful careers, right, that require something short of an actual degree. So if you think about industry-recognized credentials, certainly thinking about the very hot, fast-growing field of cybersecurity.
Yeah.
There are a lot of pathways into very productive jobs that are short of an actual degree. And so, that's an area where I think there's just much less visibility in terms of, how do I get access to that? But there's a growing marketplace of nonprofit, for-profit providers, even universities that are getting into the, credentialing space short of degrees, which I think is going to be a productive path.
I think we all would agree that the college degree is kind of a default. If you were, ambitious enough to or persistent enough to make it through the 4 to maybe 6 years of college to graduate.
Please, I got 3 kids. 4 is enough for each one.
And then that's kind of a filter, is kind of completion. And so I think it's a problem, a bit of a problem. I think there's a trend that, particularly in tech hiring, that is really positive, is skills-based interviewing. And nobody who's serious about hiring in a tech environment is not putting some kind of problem in front of the candidate. If you're hiring an engineer, you can say you went and did all these things, but you're going to be given a problem. Yeah. And you have to solve that problem and submit that problem. That's a great opportunity, I think, for non-traditional backgrounds. And we're starting to see that more in other account management. Like if you're going to you have to do an Excel problem to prove that you can do something. And I think there's an interesting balancing, a calibrating to say, hey, let me take the test. There's a really exciting company called Catalyte. It's based in Baltimore. And their claim is that anybody who can take their assessment test and score high enough on the cognitive skills, they'll train you for free to become a software developer. And they're getting a broad background of people from all sorts of backgrounds who most didn't have college degrees. So I think there's a way for us to think about skills assessment up front in the hiring flow that would help us calibrate some of these things and hire better people who ultimately are better fits, because a bad fit is not going to be long-term employment.
I've heard, particularly with respect to cyber, that almost any industry will look at somebody that has what they call skill-adjacent capabilities. So if you're in retail and you've worked in a retail store, the retailer will teach you the technology that they need if you need to prevent hacking of customer data. How do they take those skills and marry them to, as you say, a particular certificate that makes them valuable to a particular industry?
Well, look, I mean, as we talked about higher ed needing to do a better job recognizing prior learning from the military, right? Employers, I think, need to do a better job in how they describe job descriptions in posted jobs, okay? Because you have, right, like they're actually not very articulate about what's required in the job. They'll say a bachelor's degree required in a lot of these job descriptions, or minimum of 5 years experience. But the point is, you see somebody that can do the job, if you can actually evaluate whether they can do the job or do a better job evaluating adjacent skills that could get them there quicker. Employers are not very sophisticated in that manner, right? So that's
they're becoming more sophisticated.
I will tell you,
they're on their way. But
that's exactly one of the things that we do at SHRM is when we address our HR professionals is one of the very first things you need to do in your organization is look in and sort of, if you will, right size your job descriptions.
Yeah.
Really go back and analyze them. Does the job description really fit what that job does and what you need it to do? And then cut out that superfluous stuff.
Right.
So you want the essence of the job.
If you want the essence of the job, and if it really does not require a bachelor's degree, then say that. Right. And recognize that, and then implement that in a very real way.
Or at least be open to it as opposed to required.
Right.
Right. It could still be recommended, but
Yeah, then the skill, to your point, the skill adjacent piece, if your point, HR representative or the hiring manager is not trained, then a lot of times they don't see the adjacent angle. They don't understand, oh, this is actually directly related. And a lot of this stuff is rubber meets the road, where it's somebody sitting, at 7 o'clock at night looking through 15, 20, 30, 100 resumes trying to make a decision. And if we're not prepared at that point of attack, then folks are just going to go with whomever they are most familiar with, whatever skill or training they've had, et cetera.
Right. And that's that is really part of what we try to train is be aware of the skill adjacent kind of things.
We as employers have to make our job descriptions military friendly. We need to have a line that says military experience welcome, military experience desired,
But we hear about that. Though. We hear
commensurate.
like Starbucks hiring 11,000 military, or we hear about other companies, Comcast as well. Making it a statement, making it a point that they're hiring veterans. Does it always translate though into permanent employment?
I think yes. These companies that are attuned to these needs and have put that on their job descriptions are attuned to a lot of the other needs. But what is it, 80% of our veterans are hired by small to medium businesses? It's those that we have to help. It's not the Starbucks, the USAA, the Comcast, the NBC, because we've been there trying to work through this, Toyota. But it's small to medium businesses. We need to help them to translate their job descriptions to be much more military friendly and to welcome veterans, because one thing the studies have shown is that our veterans, if they look at a job description and don't meet 100% of because they're used to job skills in the military, if they don't read 100% of their prerequisites, they won't apply.
We talk about long-term employment and ensuring that these jobs are durable. What's incumbent upon, from the private sector's perspective, ensuring some sustainability of employment?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there are great examples of primarily large employers who, have started to make large investments in education and training on a lot of levels, reskilling, upskilling. We use a lot of language around this, right? So in general, there's a very positive movement of kind of top employers that are going in that direction. To your point, right, you don't really see the same thing among small and medium-sized employers who, are doing the majority of that hiring, right, and don't have the types of resources or the divisions focused on learning and training. And so somehow we've got to figure out how to potentially have an opportunity for military veterans who are leaving the military to actually come with funding to an employer for non-degree programs as well, right?
And I feel like there's also the element of method. So we're talking about getting better at assessing the skills, but then there's also the question of how do we educate employers, how do we educate our fellow veterans on what that space is? How are you better preparing yourself and presenting yourself? And one of the things we do at JPMorgan, we have a powerful team internally, the Military and Veterans Affairs team, that focuses on the population inside the company. But they have reached out to those of us who are not on that team to kind of educate us and teach us, hey, this is what we're finding. I may be a veteran, but maybe I don't know all the best practices around how to reach out to the community. And now we find out that we're interjecting that into the relationships that we build on the philanthropic side, because now we're thinking, wait a second, how are you working with military veterans? Are you using the best practices? And we'll partner with our HR business partners. And then as we start to fund schools, hey, we're funding you for an educational purpose, but how are you working with this discrete population?
All right, joining us now also is James Lynch, who served as a Huey pilot in combat. Jim, you have a question about education from Brandon, correct?
Yes. With all the emphasis on technical education and those opportunities, I just wanted to see is the opportunity still alive for liberal arts graduates coming out of the military in terms of where they can go?
Yeah,
it's not just the military, by the way.
No.
It's
It's a super interesting question. I'm so glad you asked it. Literally, I just published an article on research we did around this that tells an interesting story, right? So there's a negative narrative about liberal arts. It's not about the underlying pedagogy of liberal arts. It's the words. It's got a bad brand, right? Like if you think about liberal and arts and stick it together, and I've written articles, it's a bad brand name. But the actual essence of a liberal arts degree, right? When you say, well, what does it help somebody do? You quickly say things like critical thinking, skilled communication, right? And these are things that employers value now more than ever. So you talk about LinkedIn, they did big analysis of all the jobs that were posted. The top and most in-demand skills are actually these soft skill things, right? What we've called soft skill things. And so what's interesting though, in this research we did, we asked people to imagine being a hiring manager. We said, okay, of these 3 graduates, which one would you be most likely to hire? Nothing else. A graduate with a bachelor's degree in English, a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity, which is obviously a white hot type of degree right now, or someone with an English major who has a designation in cybersecurity. And it was a landslide victory for the English major with a cybersecurity designation. In other words, what it tells you is employers greatly value that liberal arts degree, but what they want to see is some evidence that there's also a hard skill set attached to it. So actually, the idea of somebody who's a military veteran with a liberal arts degree That's kind of a home run in terms of the marketing package of that right now.